He was 135 miles from shore, fishing alone under a calm morning sun, when something dark broke the water surface. Not a fish, not debris. As he drew closer, his heart stopped. A German shepherd, half submerged, eyes wild with fear, was swimming for its life. No collar, no chip, no explicación. What was a military-trained dog doing in the middle of the ocean? And what happened when the black SUV came looking for it? Tell us, would you have pulled him aboard? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with someone who believes every soul deserves a second chance. The morning sun draped Cedar Sound in gold, warm and forgiving for late spring. A sleepy coastal town tucked along the Carolina edge, Cedar Sound rarely saw drama more severe than a thunderstorm or a tourist falling off a paddleboard. But that Saturday was different. The Atlantic was uncharacteristically calm, the breeze steady and salt-rich, and the water, a vast blue canvas, stretched into an endless quiet. Clint Harper sat alone at the stern of his 18-foot fishing skiff, Lucille, named after a woman he still spoke to in dreams. Clint was 47, with strong shoulders and a weathered face that bore the ocean's etchings. Permanent creases at the corners of his sea-glass blue eyes and a quiet hardness along his square jaw. His short brown hair had faded under the sun's rain, now streaked silver at the temples. He wore a gray, sun-bleached shirt with the sleeves cut off and a patchy ball cap that hadn't left his head in years. After retiring from the Navy following 2 decades of deployments and surveillance missions, Clint had tried land life. But then came the accident. His wife, Dana, had died in a hit-and-run 2 years ago, and with her, Clint's ties to the world above the tide snapped clean. He'd sold everything, packed up, and returned to the only place he still trusted, the sea. Out here, 135 miles from land, the ocean hummed softly like it was breathing. Clint leaned back in his seat, rod resting loosely in his hands, eyes scanning the surface for signs of tuna. But as the minutes ticked by, the rhythm of the waves lulled him into a meditative stillness, until something broke that calm. It began with a flicker, a faint black shape rising and falling near the starboard side, bobbing irregularly. At first glance, he thought it was a drifting log. He squinted. The movement was wrong. Logs didn't paddle. He stood, grabbing the binoculars from the dash. The lens trembled slightly in his grip as the image came into focus. A dog. No, a German shepherd. It was soaked, struggling to keep its head above the water. Each movement was jerky and labored, and its hind legs barely kicked anymore. Clint's heart kicked once in his chest hard. He dropped the binoculars and spun the wheel, gunning the small outboard motor toward the figure. Jesus, he muttered under his breath, scanning the horizon. There were no boats, no debris, no flares, just the dog and an empty, indifferent sea. As he pulled closer, the dog's eyes met his. They were amber gold, wide with panic, but deep, too deep. Not feral, not wild. This wasn't a lost pet. This was something else. Clint throttled down and reached for the rope ladder he kept for diving. Easy now, he called, voice low and calm as he could manage, trying to keep his own disbelief from showing. The dog's ears didn't flick. It was beyond reaction. Without hesitation, Clint stripped off his shirt and dove in. The water was colder than expected, biting and sharp. Clint's breath caught for a moment, but his limbs moved with old instinct. He swam straight toward the shepherd. As he neared, the dog's strokes slowed further. Its body gave out just feet from his reach, legs folding as though it had finally lost the battle. Clint caught it, arms tightening around its soaked, muscular frame. The dog was heavier than it looked, strong but limp. Its fur, black and tan, was plastered against its gaunt body, and he could feel every rib. "You're not dying out here," Clint muttered, kicking furiously with one leg, dragging both of them toward the skiff. The dog didn't resist. It didn't even whimper. That silence chilled Clint more than the water. Back at the boat, Clint wedged his shoulder beneath the shepherd and boosted him up onto the deck. The dog clawed weakly at the edge, collapsing as soon as he was aboard. Clint followed, dripping and shivering. The dog lay curled tightly, breathing in shallow gasps, his head twitching toward every movement, every sound. Clint knelt beside him and ran a hand gently down the dog's spine. "You made it, big guy. Whatever the hell you've been through, you made it." He wrapped the dog in an old flannel tarp he used for camping and fetched a water jug. The shepherd didn't lift his head, but his eyes blinked slowly, as though acknowledging something. Clint poured water into a small bowl and placed it beside the dog's muzzle. No movement, no drink, just breathing. Minutes passed. Clint stared out across the sea, jaw tight. No sign of anything or anyone. No vessel in sight, not even a distant blur on the horizon. The shepherd had come from somewhere, or been left. As the sun climbed higher and the salt dried on his skin, Clint studied the animal. It had old scars, one across its back leg, another under its rib cage. The paws were worn raw, like it had been swimming or walking on rough terrain for hours. But it was the eyes that held him. Not just scared, but intelligent. Haunted. Clint dug through a supply box, pulled out a small med kit, and gently began cleaning the worst of the abrasions. The dog didn't flinch. "You've been through worse," Clint said softly. "That makes two of us." After another hour, with no sign of pursuit or explanation, Clint started the engine and pointed Lucille homeward. The shepherd still hadn't moved, save the slow, exhausted rise and fall of its ribcage beneath the tarp. Clint stayed beside him most of the way, one hand occasionally resting on the dog's flank. It was irrational, he knew, but something about the shepherd made it feel less like he was bringing home a rescue, and more like he was returning with a warning. By the time they reached the dock behind Clint's weathered clapboard cabin, set against the rocky inlets just south of the Sound, the dog had drifted into a shallow sleep. Clint carried him in his arms across the creaking planks, his boots thudding against the dock. Inside, he cleared a spot near the stone fireplace and laid the shepherd on a folded blanket, placing a bowl of water and a few strips of dried jerky nearby. The dog opened one eye, watched, but did not move. "You're safe," Clint said, voice rough. "No more swimming. Not today." The sun dipped low behind the dunes as Clint sat in his armchair, watching the fire spark to life. The room smelled faintly of salt, with smoke and wet fur. The shepherd had not barked, had not whimpered, had not so much as lifted his head. But Clint knew, this wasn't just a rescue. This was the beginning of something. By the time dusk surrendered fully to the night, the wind had died down, and the sky above Cedar Sound flickered with constellations half forgotten by city dwellers. Clint Harper sat silently in the glow of his cabin's fireplace, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee gone cold, the other resting idly on his knee. Across the room, sprawled on a folded wool blanket near the hearth, lay the German shepherd, the dog from the sea. He hadn't moved much in the hours since they'd come ashore, save the occasional twitch of an ear at distant owl calls or the sharp creak of the floorboards. He made no sound, not even a whine. Clint had dealt with feral dogs before, strays that wandered into military camps during desert deployments. But this one was different. His coat, though matted and briny, bore the subtle sheen of careful breeding. His posture, even while exhausted, retained a kind of controlled stillness, neither submissive nor aggressive, just alert. The dog hadn't eaten, hadn't drank, but he was watching. Clint finally broke the silence. "You're not a ghost, but hell if you don't feel like one." The name hung in the air, and surprisingly, the dog's ears twitched. Clint leaned forward, setting the mug aside. "Ghost, huh? That's it with you. No bark, no growl." But the shepherd blinked once, deliberate, as if to acknowledge, or at least tolerate, the sound. Clint pushed himself to his feet and knelt beside the dog. "Let's see what you've got hiding, Ghost." With slow, practiced fingers, he examined the shepherd's neck and chest. Embedded deep beneath salt-stiffened fur, just above the breastbone, something metallic scraped against his nail. He parted the fur further. It was a small, rust-touched piece of metal, flat, maybe an inch long. He gently extracted it, turning it over under the lamplight. Letters etched in faded military font caught his eye, a 7RX. Nothing more. A cold trickle ran down Clint's spine. This wasn't a collar tag. It was something else. Something embedded, deliberately. Clint stood up, mind racing. The military tag felt old, like the kind used in specialized ops to mark unregistered assets. The Navy had its share of ghosts, equipment, people, missions erased from paper, but alive in memory. He'd seen it. He'd lived it. But he had never seen it on a dog. He tucked the tag in a drawer and closed it quietly. The fire was dying. He threw on another log, then reached for the landline mounted on the kitchen wall, an old rotary relic he kept mainly out of habit. He dialed a number he hadn't used in nearly 5 years. It rang twice before a voice answered. Flat, mechanical, female. Connors. Clint exhaled slowly. Maddie, it's me. There was a pause. Then, wariness. Clint? What the hell, are you okay? I found something. Or maybe it found me. Maddie Connors had once been an Intel systems engineer at Red River, an advanced military contractor known for developing biometric tracking software, drones, and other ethically gray tech. She was brilliant, sharp-featured, and always suspicious of authority. Clint had met her during a salvage operation in the Bering Sea years ago. They'd nearly died together. That kind of thing made people stick. He described the dog, the coordinates, the tag. She went quiet. Then, send me a photo of the medal. And don't talk about this over a line you don't trust. I'll reach out in the morning. Click. Clint hung up and turned back toward the shepherd. Ghost hadn't moved. The next morning broke pale and cold, with sea fog licking the edges of Clint's dock like curious fingers. Ghost had shifted in the night just barely. His head now lay between his paws, eyes open, unfocused but still watching. Clint set down a bowl of warm broth and a slice of roasted chicken. He crouched, arms on his knees. Come on, Ghost. Just a little. The shepherd lifted his nose slightly, sniffed. A flicker of something. Well, hunger? Instinct. Sparked. Slowly, he inched forward and licked the broth. Then again. Then more. Progress. By noon, the fog had burned off. Clint brought Ghost outside, carrying him gently down to the grassy bluff above the dock. The dog's legs were stiff but held barely. He stood for a few seconds before collapsing into a sitting position, tail flat against the earth, eyes scanning the horizon. That afternoon, a battered Ford Bronco rumbled up the dirt trail behind Clint's cabin. Maddie Connors stepped out, brushing her short black curls behind one ear as she adjusted the heavy laptop bag on her shoulder. She was lean, mid-40s, with piercing green eyes and the kind of presence that made people think twice before asking questions. A faded Navy contractor badge hung from her belt, more a bluff than clearance. She knelt to eye level with Ghost, who stiffened but didn't growl. That's not a rescue dog, she said without looking away. That's training, deep training. Clint showed her the tag. Maddie booted up her laptop in the cabin's back room, the walls lined with nautical maps and old photographs. As she typed, her brows furrowed deeper. Found something. Very little. A 7. RX is tied to a black file. Code name, Echo Protocol. No handler data. No mission logs. Just one deactivation entry. Asset decommissioned. No retrieve lo feraist. Clint sat back. So they dumped him. Or someone went off script. Outside, Ghost stared out toward the water, unmoving. A storm was building far off on the horizon. That night, long after Maddie had left with a promise to dig deeper, Clint sat near the fireplace, one hand resting on Ghost's back. The dog's breathing had evened out. Still no bark. Still no sound. But when Clint reached over to scratch behind his ear, the shepherd leaned in, just slightly. It wasn't trust. Not yet. But it was something close. And in the corner of Clint's mind, where the sea used to whisper, something new was beginning to stir. A memory, maybe, or a warning. Something was coming. The morning after Maddie left, Clint sat at the edge of his dock, a worn notebook in one hand, the other trailing lazily in the water. Ghost lay a few feet away on the wooden boards, still as driftwood, eyes half-lidded but alert. Clint wasn't writing. He hadn't written in a long time. But something about having Ghost around, the silence, the damage, the watchfulness, stirred things in him. Memories he'd locked away after Dana's death. Thoughts he'd buried beneath routine and salt spray. The small metal tag sat on the railing beside him, glinting under the rising sun. A 7 RX. Just 4 characters. but they weighed more than steel. He turned when he heard tires crackling over gravel. A vehicle was approaching, slow, cautious. Clint stood and squinted through the trees, lining the bluff. A white van rolled into view, mud-splattered, unmarked. He reached into his jacket for the revolver he always kept holstered behind his back, then paused. The van door opened, and out stepped Sarah Ellis. She was in her early 50s, tall and lanky, with ash-blonde hair pulled back into a practical bun. She wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and hiking boots, the clothes of someone who lived by instinct. Her face was angular, sun-worn, with creases near her eyes that hinted at years of either laughter or sorrow. Clint couldn't tell which. She carried a soft brown satchel and a clipboard. A veterinarian. I called her, Maddie's voice said behind him. He turned to see her standing near the porch, sipping coffee from a cracked mug. Thought Ghost might need more than broth and flannel. Sarah approached cautiously, eyes going from Clint to the dog. Ghost lifted his head slightly, sniffed the air, and remained still. So this is your mystery swimmer, Sarah said, crouching nearby. Her voice was low, gentle, as though she were talking to a frightened child. Looks worse for wear, but there's a fire still in him. She reached in her bag, pulled out a stethoscope, and moved slowly. Clint watched Ghost, muscles tense. But the shepherd didn't growl. His eyes followed Sarah's every movement, but he didn't retreat. Sarah's hands were experienced, efficient. She checked pulse, eyes, pause, breath. Dehydrated. Some raw tissue damage on the pads. But no broken bones. I've seen combat dogs before. He's got that precision to him. Clint met her eyes. He's not chipped, but we found this. He handed her the tag. She frowned. That's not veterinary. Military. Maddie nodded. Black file. Echo protocol. Sarah's brows rose. I've heard whispers about Echo. It was supposed to be shut down 5 years ago. A lot of ex-military working animals were euthanized or recycled into new programs. Some didn't make it out. Clint looked at Ghost, who now rested his head on his paws again. He did. Inside the cabin, the three sat around the dining table. Sarah jotted notes while Maddie scrolled through encrypted search channels on her laptop. Clint remained mostly silent, watching the dog sleep in the corner. Ghost twitched now and then, muscle memory or something darker. Sarah closed her notebook. I've seen trauma responses in dogs. PTSD isn't just a human affliction. He may not trust easily, but he hasn't shut down completely. That's something. That night, Clint built a fire outside, beneath the sweeping stars. Ghost lay nearby, head lifted, ears perked at every rustle in the woods. The ocean in the distance hummed, low, like a secret. Clint didn't speak. He simply pulled out an old shoebox from under the cabin stairs. Inside were photographs, his old Navy unit, Dana smiling in a wide straw hat, a faded ultrasound printout, a life cut too short, a life stolen, some part of him always believed by people whose names were never spoken. He placed the box beside him and looked at Ghost. They made you to follow orders, didn't they? He said softly. Taught you how to sniff out targets, how to swim in places men couldn't go. But they didn't teach you what to do when you were left behind. Ghost slowly approached. Not quickly, not with a wagging tail, but steadily. His eyes were fixed on Clint's face. When he reached the edge of the firelight, he sat. Then, in a gesture so deliberate it felt rehearsed, he lifted his right paw and placed it gently on Clint's boot. Clint swallowed. That's twice now you've done that. Ghost tilted his head. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't instinct. It was memory. The next morning, Maddie returned with news. I found a partial personnel list linked to Echo. Nothing direct, but one handler's name keeps showing up in deleted directories. A guy named Evan Rourke, former Navy intelligence, specialized in deep-sea recon. Where is he now? Clint asked. Off-grid. Disappeared 2 years ago. Last known address was a field station in Texas. But I don't think he ever came back from his last assignment. Clint stood, arms crossed. You think he was Ghost's handler? I think he was more than that. I think he was the one who set Ghost loose. Later that day, Clint and Ghost walked the bluff trail above the sea. The wind was sharper now, clouds gathering in the distance. Storms came fast this time of year. Ghost stopped suddenly, body stiff. Clint followed his gaze and saw nothing at first, just the shifting trees. Then he heard it, the soft whirring sound of a drone, faint but growing louder. Clint didn't speak. He turned, grabbed Ghost's collar gently, and led him back toward the cabin. They'd need to move soon. But as they stepped back into the porch's shadow, Clint looked over his shoulder once more. The drone had vanished, but something deep in his gut twisted. They weren't alone anymore. The fog rolled in early that morning, thick and silvery, swallowing the trees above Cedar Sound in a quiet hush. Clint Harper stood on the porch of his weathered cabin, mug of black coffee in hand, eyes on the gray sheet beyond the bluff. Ghost lay beside him, back legs curled, ears pointed skyward. He'd been alert since before dawn, more so than usual, his muscles coiled beneath his thickening coat like wire. Something was coming. Clint felt it, too. 3 days had passed since the drone, since Maddie had spoken the name Evan Rourke aloud, and Sarah had confirmed that Ghost was carrying not just trauma, but purpose. That night, Clint had packed a rucksack for the first time in years. Not for camping, not for fishing, but for escape, just in case. At 9:47 a.m., the sound came, a low rumble of engines, quick and aggressive, cutting across the calm water like a blade. Clint moved quickly down the dock path, crouching behind the last pine before the beach. There, slicing through the mist, a sleek black speedboat pushed forward at high velocity. It slowed only as it approached the rickety boathouse Clint hadn't used in years. 2 men emerged. The first was stocky, mid-40s, built like a wrestler left in a suit too tight for his shoulders. His skin was tanned, his hair cropped military short, and his steps were sharp and practiced. The second man was leaner, pale, with thinning blonde hair and the twitchy gait of someone who'd spent too much time behind glass monitors. Both wore civilian jackets and jeans, but their boots and their bearing betrayed them. Former military, or worse, private contractors. Clint didn't recognize them, but Ghost did. The moment they appeared, Ghost was at the cabin door, body rigid, eyes hard. His growl was low, guttural, unlike anything Clint had heard from him before. The men made their way slowly up the dock. Clint stood on the porch before they could reach the steps, coffee mug gone, revolver, now, tucked at his hip. "Can I help you?" he asked, voice flat. The stocky man smiled. His eyes didn't. "Mr. Harper, is it? You have my name. Now give me yours. We're not here for introductions." He motioned casually toward the woods. "We're looking for something that belongs to us." Clint didn't move. "What kind of something?" The lean man cut in, voice thin and brittle. "A biological asset, recovered by mistake." "Tak a 7x." Clint's jaw tightened. "You mean the dog?" "No, sir," the lean one said. "We mean property. You're harboring classified military technology." Ghost stepped onto the porch beside Clint. The larger man twitched when he saw him. "He's not yours," Clint said coldly. The stocky one narrowed his eyes. He was trained under Echo protocol. He's a walking archive of sensitive reconnaissance data. Unauthorized retention is a federal offense. Clint nodded once. "You've made your position clear. Now get off my land." They didn't move immediately, but then the larger man raised his hand in mock surrender. "We'll be back. I'll be ready." They turned, walked back to the speedboat, and vanished into the mist. That night, the cabin felt tighter than usual. Sarah came by late, dropping off supplies, bandages, protein-rich dog food, and an old army stretcher. She noticed Clint's unease. "They came, didn't they?" she asked. He nodded. 2 of them. Smooth, official. Didn't say who they were with, but they knew about Echo. Sarah glanced toward the darkening windows. "You need to get out of here, Clint." "I know, but I think they'll come first." At 2:12 a.m., Ghost stirred. He let out a low bark, not loud, not panicked, but precise. Clint was already out of bed, dressed in boots and a worn green jacket. He grabbed the revolver from the drawer and crouched beside the door. Ghost was near the back in trance, posture tense, nose aimed at the east window. A soft hum, then the unmistakable whir of a rotor slicing the stillness overhead. A helicopter. Clint's pulse kicked. "Basement," he hissed. They slipped into the trapdoor behind the fireplace, descending into the shallow root cellar beneath the cabin. It smelled of cedar, soil, and iron. Ghost didn't hesitate. Through the thin cracks in the floorboards above, Clint could see faint flickers of light, sweeps from a mounted spotlight. The helicopter hovered for a few minutes, then vanished. But something else moved. A soft clatter near the back door. They were on foot. The next sound was the metallic groan of a lockpick. Clint didn't wait. He rose through the trapdoor, revolver drawn. The first man came through the window, lean, pale, same twitchy figure from the dock. But this time he was armed. Clint fired once, a warning shot that buried itself in the wooden beam beside the intruder's head. The man froze. But before he could retreat, Ghost lunged. No sound, no hesitation. He struck like a coiled spring. The man fell back, crashing into a table as Ghost pinned him, jaws at his throat, but not biting, just threatening, eyes blazing. But then a second figure appeared in the hallway. The larger man. He swung a short baton and cracked Clint hard in the shoulder, knocking the revolver free. Clint stumbled, but managed to block the next hit with a metal pan from the kitchen wall. Ghost snapped around and tackled the second man. This time there was blood. The man screamed. Ghost bit deep into his forearm and shook violently. But the larger man recovered quickly, driving his elbow into Ghost's ribs, sending the dog sprawling with a yelp. Clint lunged forward and tackled him, fists swinging, years of Navy muscle reawakening in a single moment. They crashed to the floor, rolling through shattered glass and spilled embers from the fireplace. Clint got one good punch in, then another. The intruder groaned and didn't rise again. The cabin was chaos. Smoke, blood, growls. Ghost limped to Clint's side, his right flank bleeding. Clint grabbed the rucksack from the closet, scooped up the metal tag, Ghost medical kit, and the old photo of Dana, then slung it all over his shoulder. He didn't speak. He just looked Ghost in the eyes. "We're leaving." Ghost stood, legs shaky but ready. They vanished into the forest behind the cabin as the first sirens echoed in the distance. The storm hit like a sudden slap. No warning, just fury. By the time Clint and Ghost reached the coastal highway, rain had already begun to streak across the windshield in diagonal sheets. The sky was bruised and violent, clouds folding over themselves like fists. Clint's old Ford Bronco rattled against the wind, tires gripping slick pavement as he pressed forward, eyes narrowed and jaw locked. Ghost lay in the back seat, wrapped in an old army blanket, his injured flank cleaned and bound in gauze. His breathing was steady, but his body was taut, alert in that soldier stillness Clint had come to recognize. They had been driving for 4 hours. Every mile they put between themselves and Cedar Sound felt borrowed. Their destination, a decommissioned military surveillance station known only as Outpost Kilo 9, buried into the cliffside near the Gulf Coast. Clint had served there a decade earlier, when it was a listening post for sub-ocean acoustic monitoring, a Cold War ghost that had long since been erased from public record. Now it stood forgotten, choked in vines and rust, hidden behind locked gates and falling coastal cliffs. And that's exactly why Clint chose it. As they turned off the main road, the dirt path to the outpost had nearly vanished beneath moss and thyme. Clint killed the headlights and coasted down the last 100 meters in near darkness, windshield wipers clapping in rhythm with his pulse. The building appeared through the mist like a tomb, concrete, cracked but still standing. He stopped the truck beside what was once a supply shed, now half swallowed by bramble. Clint stepped out, wind lashing at his coat, and opened the passenger door. "Let's move." Ghost jumped down, stiff but determined. They crossed the uneven ground quickly, Clint leading the way with a flashlight wrapped in red cellophane. He punched in an old access code at the steel hatch behind the main bunker, the keypad flickering weakly before clicking open with a tired hiss. They slipped inside, locking the door behind them. The bunker's interior smelled of salt, mold, and decay. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling, and rust bloomed across every metal surface. Clint made his way to the old command room, setting up a small generator he had stashed there years ago. Emergency use only. The lights flickered on, dim and ghostly. Ghost sniffed the space cautiously, then settled on a pile of discarded canvas tarps, curling in a half-sleep. Clint sat at the rusted operations desk and pulled out the folder he'd taken from the cabin. together with the tag marked A7RX and a USB stick Maddie had given him before they fled. She said it held archived fragments from a buried network. Clint hadn't dared open it until now. The screen lit up, the interface clunky and outdated. After a few minutes, he was in. Echo Protocol, Subsection, Aquatic Reconnaissance Unit Alpha 7. Clint read silently, eyes flicking over pages. Operation briefs, scanned documents, thermal maps, and post-mission debriefs. Ghost wasn't just any asset. He had been deployed to monitor radiation leaks beneath deep-sea drilling rigs, specifically near the Sable 9 platform, a classified ocean facility operated jointly by military and energy contractors. One mission report detailed what Ghost had encountered. Levels of radiation 3 times the expected threshold, structural instability, and signs of human remains beneath collapsed seabed tunnels. Ghost had returned from that mission, but the accompanying surveillance drone had been destroyed. He was the only witness. The final log entry chilled Clint. Asset A7, RX returned compromised, exposed to unverified contaminants. Marked for decommission. Handler missing, presumed dead. Decommissioned, Clint whispered. You weren't retired. You were silenced. Ghost opened one eye. His breathing changed slightly. Clint leaned back, hand over his face. They buried you. An hour later, as thunder echoed above the cliffs, Clint connected a second device. An encrypted transmitter Maddie had built from salvage parts and smuggled into his bag. It had one purpose: send information anonymously. Clint uploaded the data package, logs, video fragments, GPS reports, and images from the Sable 9 recon file, into a secure public leak directory. He didn't sign it. He didn't attach his name. But he did leave a message, addressed to one person. To Jordan Wexler, investigative journalist. Subject: You're not chasing ghosts. They're chasing you. Attached: Echo_protocol_archive_7RX. Terms: No names. No pictures. Leave the dog out of it. If you publish the truth, not the monster myth. He hit send. Outside, the storm had begun to ease, but Clint didn't move. He sat beside Ghost on the floor, hand resting lightly on the dog's shoulder. You don't owe anyone a damn thing, he said quietly. Not them, not me, but they're going to come looking. We might have just lit a fire they can't put out. Ghost raised his head. For the first time since they arrived, his tail thumped gently once against the floor. Just before dawn, Clint heard the crackle of static from the portable radio tucked in the corner of the room. At first it was garbled, then clearer. A woman's voice. Files verified. Sources say Sable 9 was shut down within 72 hours of silent extraction. No official comment from Department of Naval Operations. He turned the volume down. It had begun. But just as Clint felt the weight of what he had unleashed, another light blinked on the screen. A signal. Weak. Encrypted. Not a response from the journalist. Something else. Coordinates. Deep ocean. Latitude logged 3 days ago. Clint stared. They sent another team. Ghost was already standing. The lighthouse at Cape Hatteras stood like an ancient sentinel against the sky, wind-battered and forgotten. Its striped paint had long since faded into ash-gray streaks, and the beam no longer swept across the water. For decades, it had been nothing more than a landmark for fishermen and storm watchers. But now, it had become a sanctuary. Clint Harper pulled the heavy oilskin tarp tighter over the old generator near the rear shed as the wind swept salt spray up from the sea. 1 week had passed since the leak, since he had exposed Echo Protocol to the world, since he and Ghost had vanished. They had slept in abandoned barns, traveled at night, crossed state lines without a trace. Now, tucked into the keeper's quarters beside the lighthouse, Clint could finally breathe again. Ghost had adapted to the place faster than Clint. He had staked quiet ownership of the weathered deck, the dunes beyond, and the crumbling spiral stair of the tower. And for the first time, Clint saw him not as a weapon or a project, but as a dog reclaiming pieces of himself. Ghost's wounds had healed slowly, but surely. His ribs no longer showed sharply beneath his coat. His movements, once precise and cold, now held occasional bursts of unrestrained energy. That morning, as Clint finished securing supplies behind a lighthouse, he heard it. A sound so unfamiliar it took him a moment to recognize. A bark, not an alarm, not a train signal. A bark, sharp, free, full of life. Clint turned just in time to see Ghost bolting down the sloped hill, chasing a piece of wind-blown driftwood like a puppy. His paws dug deep into the sand, kicking up clouds of gold. His tail whipped back and forth. Clint blinked hard, feeling something tighten in his chest. He knelt, resting his hands on his knees, watching Ghost tumble, stand, and tumble again. "That's what they took from you," he murmured. "And now you've taken it back." The news had gone public 5 days ago. Press briefings, denials, conflicting reports. The Department of Naval Operations released a statement dismissing Echo Protocol as an exploratory concept never approved for implementation. A lie so transparent, it only raised more questions. But Clint didn't care. The truth was out there. That was enough. The next day, the sun rose in a copper blaze, and Clint brewed coffee on a makeshift propane burner just outside the doorway. He wore a faded flannel and boots lined with duct tape. His face had grown more rugged these days, the beard thickening with each dawn, but his eyes had softened. Peace had a way of doing that. Ghost sat beside him, ears swiveling to catch the sound of distant gulls. Clint handed him a strip of dried salmon. Ghost took it gently, chewing with deliberate calm. Then, from down the dirt path that wound through the dunes, came the sound of voices. Clint stood slowly. Ghost followed, not tense, but aware. A woman rounded the bend first, moving carefully through the sand. She was in her late 30s, with curly brown hair pulled into a loose bun, wearing jeans, a canvas coat, and worn sneakers. Her expression was uncertain, eyes flicking from the lighthouse to Clint. Beside her walked a young girl, small, no more than 8 years old, with a long navy raincoat trailing behind her and bright green eyes full of quiet knowing. She held something in her hand, a photo. The woman raised a hand in greeting. "Sorry, we don't mean to intrude. I'm looking for someone." Clint tilted his head. "You found a lighthouse. Not many someone's left here." The girl stepped forward before her mother could respond. She held up the photo, and it was a man in a wet suit, smiling, kneeling beside a young German shepherd. The photo was sun-faded, water-damaged, but unmistakable. The dog in the picture had eyes just like Ghost's. The girl's voice was soft. "His name was Dagger. He belonged to my dad." Clint knelt, taking the photo gently. Ghost stood still beside him, ears shifting. "My father worked offshore," the woman explained, her voice catching. "He was a contract diver for a naval energy project. He disappeared 2 years ago. They told us it was an equipment failure. Never found the body. But this morning, the photo forums lit up. Someone posted about a dog rescued far out in the ocean. My daughter saw the picture. She recognized him. Ghost moved then. He didn't bark. He didn't hesitate. He walked toward the girl slowly, eyes focused, head slightly tilted. The girl dropped to her knees. "Dagger." Ghost stopped in front of her. His tail lifted, and with a quiet, almost reverent motion, he placed his paw gently into her lap. The girl burst into tears. Her mother dropped beside her, hugging them both. Ghost didn't move. He leaned into them, as if some deeply locked part of him had finally found its way home. Clint turned away, jaw tight, hands in his pockets. Later that evening, as the sun painted the dunes in amber and the ocean turned soft with twilight, Clint sat on the lighthouse steps with a journal open in his lap. Ghost, now Dagger again, lay nearby, his head resting on the girl's legs as she traced circles in the sand. Clint wrote only one line. "Freedom is never found. It's reclaimed." The next day, the woman returned with papers, veterinary records, photos, documentation of the original handler, her late husband. It was all there. Maddie confirmed it remotely. Clint didn't contest a thing. He simply handed over the tag marked A7RX. Before leaving, the girl ran back up the stairs and wrapped her arms around Clint's waist. "Thank you for bringing him home." Clint crouched, looking her in the eyes. "He brought himself home. I just happened to be in the way." Ghost, no, Dagger, stood beside the truck as the engine started. He looked back once, then again. His eyes met Clint's. They didn't need words. Later that night, as the wind whispered across the cliffs, Clint sat alone on the porch. The lighthouse creaked faintly above him. He sipped from a chipped mug, eyes on the stars. A second bark echoed down the beach. He smiled. Maybe, just maybe, that wasn't the last he'd hear from him. Sometimes, what's broken isn't meant to be fixed. It's meant to be understood. Ghost, or Dagger, didn't just survive the deep ocean and betrayal. He found his way home, not by force, but by grace, love, and memory. In our own lives, we all carry pieces of pain, silence, or stories no one else sees. But like Dagger, sometimes all it takes is a moment of recognition, a quiet act of kindness, to remind us we still belong somewhere. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below. Tell us what part moved you most. And if you believe in second chances, in healing, in unseen miracles, write amen in the comments. Subscribe for more true stories that reveal the light in the darkest places. And may God bless each of you who watched this far.